Okay, we're going to continue with our STAAR review. I just noticed that when I made the copies, I made these a little too close together. So these are actually two different problems. So I'm going to cover up this problem here because we're just looking at this first one. Okay, it says the length of a rectangular frame is 15 inches. The width of the frame is 8 inches. What is the length of the diagonal? Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to draw a picture since there's not a picture. It says the length of a rectangular frame. So I'm going to draw a rectangle. Okay, the length of the frame is 15 inches. Okay, and the width is 8 inches. They want to know what is the length of the diagonal. So we originally had a rectangle, but since I drew a diagonal, we now have a right triangle. Okay, remember, when you're looking for a missing side length of a right triangle, or when you're looking for the diagonal, you're going to use a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Okay, now the two sides that form that right angle, they are A and B. And remember, it doesn't matter which one's A, which one's B. What matters is directly across from that right angle is C, the hypotenuse or the diagonal. Okay, so we've written the formula. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to plug in. So for A, I'm going to plug in 8. So we have 8 squared plus what I'm going to plug in for B is 15 squared. And I don't know what C is, so I'm going to leave this C squared. So since I want to know what C is, not C squared, what that means is I'm going to do the opposite of what squaring a number is, and that is finding the square root. So to find the answer, you're going to take the square root. And to find C, you're going to add. So I'm going to come over here to Desmos, and don't forget to put on the square root symbol. And I have 8 squared plus 15 squared. So C, my answer, is equal to 17. Okay. Now, let's look at the next question. Okay. They have a picture drawn for us, and they tell us it's a right triangle, and they give us the side lengths, or they show us the side lengths. We have 12, and we have X. We don't know what that is. Okay. They give us this, the diagonal, which is 39. Remember, if they have a picture, what you need to do is find that right angle and circle it. Now, I know on the test, you're not going to be able to circle it. Okay. Now, you can either draw it on your paper, or you can, on the computer, use your finger or even use the pen tool, and you can circle it. The two sides that form that right angle are going to be A and B. Directly across is going to be C. Okay, now I'm going to do A squared plus B squared equals C squared. You always write the formula. And remember, guys, it is on your formula chart. Use your formula chart. So for A, I'm going to plug in 12. So I have 12 squared. For B, I don't know what that is. So instead of writing X, I'm just going to leave it as B squared. And C is 39. So 39 squared. Now, I want to get this b squared by itself. So to remove this and to move it to the other side, remember I'm going to subtract. Okay? So to find what b is, now I have b by itself, I'm going to subtract. But remember, I'm going to put it under the square root symbol. C is going to go first. So 39 squared minus 12 squared. And it's all going to be underneath the square root symbol. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to do square root of 39. Don't forget to square it. Minus 12 squared. Okay. And for my answer, I get 37.1. I'm just going to round to the nearest 10. So 1, 0, that 0 tells me to leave that 1 alone. So 37.1 is my answer. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the video, And I want you to just do, okay, these are two different problems. So I just want you to do this one. Okay, so let's see if you're right. It's a right triangle. They want us to find the length of the ramp. So what is the length of the distance of this? I'm going to find my right angle and circle it. I'm going to label my two side lengths A and B. Directly across is C. I'm going to write my formula. So I have A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Okay, hopefully you plugged in correctly. A is 11, B is 60, and I don't know what C is, so that's just C squared. Now, I have C by itself, so all I'm going to do is do what's on this side, okay? But to find my answer, remember, I don't want to know what C squared is. I want to do the opposite and find the square root because I want to know what C is. So in Desmos, underneath the square root symbol, I'm going to put 11 squared plus 60 squared. So I'm going to come over here. Hopefully this is what you did. Don't forget this square root symbol. I have 11 squared plus 60 squared. So my answer is 61. So C is equal to 61. Okay, so hopefully that's what you got. Okay, now I'm going to pause the video and I want you to do this problem down here. Okay, remember, if there's not a picture, what I want you to do is draw it. Okay, so it says the width of a rectangle is 4 feet. The diagonal of the rectangle is 13 feet. Which measurement is closest to the length of this rectangle? So I'm drawing a rectangle. The width of the rectangle is 4. So here's my width. Then it tells us the diagonal, here's my diagonal, is 13 feet. So I'm going to label this 13. They want to know what is closest to the length. This is my length here, so I don't know, so I'm going to put an X. Okay. Here's my right angle. I'm going to circle it. The two sides that form that right angle are A and B, so hopefully that's what you labeled. Directly across from that right angle is the letter C. Okay, so we know what the diagonal is. We're looking for one of the lengths. So hopefully you started off with the formula. A squared is equal to C squared. A is 4, so I have 4 squared. I don't know what B is, so I'm going to leave that as B squared. C is 13. Now, I don't have the B by itself, so I've got to remove that. In order to move this to the other side, to remove it, I'm going to subtract. Okay, so I have B squared is equal to this. So to find B squared, I'm going to subtract this. But remember, I want B, so underneath the square root symbol, I'm going to put 13 squared minus 4 squared. Okay, so I'm going to come over here. Remember, I don't want you just to delete like this. I want you just to X out and start over. So I had the square root symbol, 13, don't forget to square it, minus, because we know what C is, 4 squared. And so hopefully for your answer, you got 12.4 is your answer. Okay. Now let's look at this one. Now, I don't want you to get this confused with slope, okay? When you have a graph and you have a diagonal line, that doesn't always mean slope or doesn't always mean Pythagorean theorem. We've got to read what it's asking. They want to know what is the length, okay? Doesn't have the word slope in it, okay? They want the length. So how long is that? So I'm not going to get a ruler and measure, and I'm not going to sit there and count because when it's a diagonal, you can't count. But what I can do from that diagonal is I can form that right triangle, okay? Here's my right angle. I'm going to label this A. I'm going to label this one B, and directly across is C. So I'm looking for C because on a graph, you can find what the vertical line is and what the horizontal line is. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that side length is 6. This side length here is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, my right angle, this is A and B. So I'm going to write the formula. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. I have A is 6, so I have 6 squared. B is 10. And C, I don't know, so I'm going to leave it as C squared. Since I already have C by itself, guys, I don't have to remove anything. I'm going to add. But remember, when you put in Desmos to get your answer, put it underneath that square root symbol, and it's 6 squared plus 10 squared. Okay, so I'm going to come over here to Desmos, and I'm going to exit out. Okay, I'm going to put the square root symbol, and I have 6 squared plus 10 squared. And I'm going to round to the nearest 10th, and you get 11.66. So to the nearest 10th is 11.7. Okay, so I'm going to pause the video, and now I want you to do this one. Okay, let's see if you're right. It says, which is closest to the length? So how long is this? So hopefully what you did is you drew a right triangle. Now remember, you can draw it above or you can draw it below. Either way, we're going to get the same answer if we do it right. Okay, here's my right angle. So I'm going to label this A and B. Directly across, the diagonal is always C. So for this side length, hopefully you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. For this side length, hopefully you got 1, 2, 3. Okay, I'm going to write the formula. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Okay, for A, I'm going to label it 5. For B, I'm going to plug in 3. And I don't know what C is, so I'm going to leave it as C squared. Remember, guys, when it is on a graph, you're always going to be looking for C because C is always going to be the diagonal. Since I have C by itself, guys, I'm going to add. But to get my answer, I'm going to put in Desmos the square root of 5 squared plus 3 squared. So I'm going to come over here underneath the square root symbol, and I'm going to put 5 squared plus 3 squared. I'm going to double check everything. So to the nearest 10th, hopefully you got 5.8 for your answer. Okay. Now, let's look at the back. Now, without even looking at the answer choices, I want you to look. This is a right triangle. Here's your right angle. Remember, this is A. The two sides that form that right angle are A and B. Directly across is C. So, A squared. So what that means is the area of A plus the area of B is going to be equal to the area of C. Okay, but if you notice, these aren't A and B and C. This is N, so the area of N plus the area of L is equal to K. So the sum of the areas, that means I'm adding. N and L is equal. They're always going to be equal. So what you need to do is find the answer choice that says equal. This is greater, so it's not that. This one says less than, it's not going to be that. Remember, it's going to be equal. And it's the two smaller squares, the two squares that form that right angle. This tells us N and K. Well, that would be these. Guys, that's not the two smallest. And not only that, it doesn't form that right angle. What forms that right angle are N and L. These two here. So letter A. Okay. So I'm going to pause the video. And I want you to do this one here. Okay, remember that you're looking at it being the same. The two smaller ones are going to be the same or equal to the bigger one. Okay, so let's see if you're right. Here is the right angle. these are A and B, is equal to directly across that right angle is C. So we have A squared plus B squared equals C squared. So the number of tiles needed to cover X is the same as the tiles needed to cover both Y and Z. No. The number of tiles needed to cover Y is the same as both of these. No. Remember, both the two smaller ones are going to fit in the bigger one. So the number of tiles needed to cover Z is the same as the tiles need to cover both X and Y. These two together equal Z. So hopefully you got letter C.